Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the week-long KRAD COVID Readings Klingon event, in which I read The Unhappy Ones, my novelette from the Star Trek 7 Deadly Sins anthology, which features Kor, Kang, and Koloth from the original series and also from Deep Space Nine. And we move on to the next part. This is all in celebration of the release of Star Trek Adventures Klingon Empire Core Rulebook from Modiphius Games, to which I contributed a couple of chapters. So anyhow, Chapter 5. Korax. Korax had never had much use for engineers. They were whining, tiresome creatures who always had technical excuses for not following orders. During that incident on K7, that cursed place, Korax had picked the fight with the Enterprise crew mainly because their chief engineer was present. That engineer had retaliated by beaming hundreds of Tribbles into the Groth engine room. Korax had vowed that he would avenge himself on the Earther Montgomery Scott for that outrage. So when Korax came into Koloth's cabin for his orders, he was disheartened when his captain said, "Your task, Commander, will be to supervise Lieutenant Pybach's work on repairing the mine's atmospheric dome." Ever the good soldier, Korax said only, "As you command." Koloth smiled. "I know how you feel, Korax. Personally, I find engineers to be as tiresome as you do. Your task is of greater import than observing Pybach's minions. The rabble may attempt sabotage of the repairs. You're to be on guard for them." Where Koloth's smile was his usual insincere one, Korax's was wide and genuine. "It will be my pleasure, sir." Oh, and Korax, do try to leave at least one of them alive for questioning. This mission will go far more smoothly with proper intelligence, not just Supervisor Kobik's conjectures. Korax nodded his head in acknowledgement and proceeded to the transporter bay. Unfortunately, there was very little evidence of saboteurs and quite a bit of annoying engineers making excuses. To make matters worse, it wasn't even Pybach, but rather the mine engineers who were causing the problems. Mostly, Korax was able to ignore it, but when a shouting match arose between Pybach and the mine's head engineer, a Kushka named KLINGON, he found it necessary to intervene. "What is going on here?" he asked in a voice that cut through the argument. Both men spoke at once in an incoherent babble. "Be quiet!" When they both became quiet, Korax looked at his subordinate. "Chief Engineer Pybach, report." "This Batak refuses to implement my repair schedule." KLINGON bared his teeth. "That is because your repair schedule is idiotic. We have a 4-shift rotation, which makes poor use of the personnel available to you. I only have 12 people. No, you brainless Todzach. You have 30 with my engineers, and they are more efficiently used on a 3-shift rotation. Your engineers are not trained on my equipment. I'll need to waste countless hours training them to..." "Enough!" Korax was ready to rip his own beard off his chin. "If I wished to listen to the mewlings of old women, I'd have stayed home on Kuvat." He fixed his gaze upon KLINGON. "You will do as Lieutenant Pybach says, or I will kill you and have Supervisor Kobik assign someone who will do as Lieutenant Pybach says." Turning his gaze upon the chief engineer, he added, "And if I hear you two arguing again, I will kill you both." He shook his head. "Now go do whatever it is you're supposed to be doing." KLINGON snarled at Pybach. "I was going to repair the plasma manifolds, then replace the topoline injectors." "And I told you," Pybach said with a snarl of his own, "that I can do one of those tasks." "Our plasma manifolds are very particular," Pybach rolled his eyes. "They're standard issue RET manifolds, or at least they were standard issue during the Second Dynasty." Looking at Korax, he added, "This mine is filled with ancient equipment. It's a wonder any of it runs. However, I was trained on RET equipment as a child. That was all we had on Forcus 3. "You could have mentioned that," KLINGON said in a tone that was, in Korax's opinion, unbecoming a Klingon. Korax said, "It isn't your concern, KLINGON. Your only concern is with how you follow Lieutenant Pybach's orders." He moved close enough to smell the Raktajino on KLINGON's breath. "And mine." "Of course," KLINGON said weakly. "I will repair the manifold, Lieutenant, if you'd be so kind as to take the topoline injector." Pybok threw up his arms. I just told you! Yes, Lieutenant, I know, but the manifold is near the top of the dome and requires climbing up that very long ladder. Cliven pointed up at a nearby thin metal ladder that led up to the top of the dome. I climb that ladder daily. I do not wish to risk you. Now Pybok got in Cliven's face. I am not some broken-down old fool who needs to be coddled, Cliven. I am an officer in the Defense Force. Fine! Cliven threw up his hands and walked away. I will fix the injectors and you can break your neck. Korax walked in the other direction. I hate engineers, he muttered, uncaring if Pybok heard him. It wasn't as if the lieutenant hadn't heard it before. As Korax went back to the desk where he had been reading over the latest dispatches from command, Koloth expected him to go through them and report anything the captain might need to know. He heard the impact of boot on rung that indicated Pybok was climbing the ladder in question. Then he heard Pybok's distant voice. What are you doing up here? Not liking the sound of that in the least, Korax ran back to the base of the ladder. Craning his neck up, he saw 3 Klingons, all Kuchka, on a catwalk that was partway up the ladder. They were who Pybok was talking to. In answer to the engineer's query, one of them lunged at him with what looked like a pipe. Pybok was able to deflect the blow, but he was in a poor position. The catwalk was at his waist, and he was reliant on the ladder's rungs for support. His 3 foes had more freedom of movement. Without hesitation, Korax unholstered his disruptor. Koloth had only ordered him to take 1 prisoner, after all. His aim was true, and the one who had attacked Pybok was dead moments later, screaming from the fatal disruption of his nervous system. Korax grinned with glee at the kill. That gave Pybok time to leap onto the catwalk. He faced the other 2, unfortunately from a position that spoiled Korax's shot. Much as he hated engineers, he wasn't about to sacrifice one of his officers just to kill 2 rebellious Petakbu. One of Pybok's opponents leapt at him, and the 2 of them quickly fell to the catwalk floor, rolling around. The 3rd opponent held back, his hand moving toward his hip. Korax fired at the 3rd one, but missed. That was when the other one unholstered a disruptor pistol of his own. Ducking behind a console, Korax avoided being hit by the beam from the pistol, which appeared to be one of the old Los Machsok types. Considering nobody on this mine was supposed to be issued disruptors of any kind, Korax wondered where this particular weapon came from. However, that question could be answered later. Peering out from the console, Korax saw that Pybok had his foe in a wrestling hold, and was now throwing him over his shoulder. Normally, such a move would have had the opponent on the floor, but this was not a wrestling square, but a narrow catwalk, so Pybok's throw took his opponent over the railing and crashing to the floor near Korax. Korax spared the man one glance. His neck appeared broken, and then fired back up at the catwalk. Distracted by his comrade's plunge, he was an easy target for Korax, who hit him on the weapon arm. He dropped his pistol, and that left him open for Pybok to palm heel his jaw. He collapsed like a sack of Lospev. Pybok holstered the man over his shoulder, then climbed quickly down the ladder. Arriving at ground level, he dropped the groggy Klingon to the floor and looked at Korax, echoing the commander's own thoughts. I thought they weren't issued any disruptors. They weren't. Korax knelt down and pointed his own disruptor under the man's chin. You will tell me who your co-conspirators are. I will say nothing to you, Urwi. At that insult, Korax instinctively activated the disruptor, which cut through the flesh of the man's chin and blew out the top of his head. Chapter 6. Koloth. Koloth had been extremely grateful to receive the invitation from Mara on the Votak to dine with her and Kang that evening. After the day he had, he needed a good meal. He arrived on the Votak to find a Beck awaiting him. I will take you to the captain's cabin, the soldier said, then turned and left, expecting Koloth to follow him, as was proper. It was only a short walk down the corridor until the Beck arrived at a door that had 2 Becks already guarding it. Koloth had left his own bodyguard on the divisor as a courtesy to Kang. He hoped that Kang had posted these guards and that Kor hadn't been tasteless enough to bring his guard on board. Inside, he found Kang and his mate, Mara, as well as Kor already present. Mara smiled. I was starting to think you were not going to come, son of Lashar. As if I would turn down a meal from your chef, Koloth said as he took the seat next to Kor, leaving both captains to face the couple. Yes, Kor said, raising a glass of Brashtanti ale. I've heard stories about the glorious meals served by the Votak's chef. They're not all true. Mara said. Galark is far better, she added with a smile. All three men laughed at that, and Kor drank his ale. Kang rose to his feet and approached a sideboard. Now that we are all here, we may open the blood wine. Excellent, Koloth said. Of course, if we were dining on the Divisor, the blood wine would be needed to get us drunk enough to not notice the taste of the food, or rather lack of same. As he used his diktog to slice off the cork of the bottle, which, Koloth noted came from the Ajpri vintners, one of the finest in the Empire, Kang said, You once told me that you would sooner give up your good right arm than give up your chef. I was not given the option. After the incident with the Tribbles on the Groth, he refused to report to the Divisor, instead choosing a lesser position at the Lucara edifice on Kronos. Koloth shuddered. His replacement is a decent technician, certainly, but preparation of food is an art. Then prepare, Mara said, as Kang poured the blood wine into her mug, to dine on artwork. Indeed I shall, madam, Koloth said with a bow of his head. Kang finished pouring the blood wine, then raised his own mug. To victory! To glory! To the Empire! Kabla! Koloth cried, Kabla! As did Kor and Mara, and they slammed their mugs together, then drank heartily of the blood wine. A fine vintage, Kor said, wiping the wine from his mustache with his sleeve. Indeed, as usual, Koloth said. Tell us, Koloth, Kang asked, what delayed your arrival at the supper table? Koloth sighed. He had hoped that dinner would provide a respite from the idiocy of the mine, but Kang was the senior here, so Koloth was duty-bound to answer. My first officer and chief engineer encountered some of the Malvac Bortas rabble, attempting to sabotage the same atmospheric dome that was damaged previously. There were 3 of them, and they had their homemade explosives, and a disruptor. What? Kor said. I thought these mines weren't issued disruptors. They aren't, Koloth said tightly. When Korax informed me of this, I questioned Supervisor Kobik, who said he purchased several surplus Losmak Sok disruptors for his security detail. Kang shook his head. And that Yintag Sorkav allowed one to be stolen? At least one, Koloth said. Sorkav claimed it was the only one missing, but I'm loath to trust him. You are wise not to, Kang said. Before he could elaborate, the door slid open to reveal 3 Klingons coming in with 2 trays each. One carried a massive skull stew and a plate full of both gach and racht, artfully arranged around a bowl of the finest-smelling grapok sauce Koloth had ever encountered. The second carried a bowl of jinjok bread that smelled fresh out of the oven and magnificent, and a plate containing 4 massive klongat legs. The third had a roquette blood pie that smelled to Koloth as if it had been spiced with something unfamiliar, and a large plate that, Koloth soon realized, was a casserole, made for mixing Pipius Claw, Heart of Targ, and Glatzt, and a tureen filled with bagol soup made with Durrani lizard skins. The hardest part for Koloth was deciding which to eat first. His mouth filled with jinjok bread that he dipped in the grapok sauce, Kor asked, What has Sorkav done to earn your ire, Kang? After Kang, between mouthfuls of gach and racht, told of Beck Jerva's challenge and Sorkav's reaction, Koloth shook his head in disgust. Absurd. Absolutely absurd. What do you expect? Mara said bitterly. I expect them to behave as Klingons, Kor said. This entire situation is incomprehensible. We are all Klingons, are we not? Are we? Mara asked. Kang sneered through his blood pie. Yours, Kor, is a typical high-born attitude. And why not? Kor asked while ripping off some meat from one of the Klongat leg bones. I am noble-born, as is everyone seated at this table. Otherwise we would not be officers, and certainly not captains. With a glance at Mara, he held up his mug of blood wine and added with a smile, Or science officers. Yes, Kang said, but we are not treated as nobility. Kobik and Sorkav certainly don't treat us so, Koloth added. Then he poured himself some of the soup and slurped up some. I must say, Kang, that Galark has outdone himself. Though the compliment was legitimate, he was mainly hoping to steer the conversation away from duty. No such luck. Kang was determined. We will never be considered true warriors, true Klingons, as long as we look like this! Kang indicated his own forehead with his right hand. Kors looked sour. As long as we fight the Empire's battles, we are warriors. Soldiers, perhaps, Kang said, but warriors, hardly. Slamming his hand down on a table, which caused the soup to splash onto it, Kors said, I am the equal of any shipmaster in the fleet! Those under my command fight and die for the Empire, regardless of their cranial topography. No doubt, Kang said, his solemn deep tones in contrast to Kor's louder ones. But where are they set? Kor gnawed at his Klonget leg. What do you mean? During the conflict with the Federation a turn ago, your mission was to secure a planet of pacifists, was it not? Organia was a critical position. Having despaired of a change of subject, Koloth decided to bolster his friend's argument. Yes, but how difficult was it to subdue? Were it not for Kirk, may he suffer all the torments of Grithor, you would have faced no resistance whatsoever. Kang scowled and gulped bloodwine. The perfect task for mere Kuchka. Meanwhile, Koloth continued, the Ridgeheads were given the plum battle assignments, while we were left to secure insignificant planets or less well-traveled portions of the border. Had the Organians not stopped the conflict, the important battles would all have been claimed by Chemkuch. Since they were on the subject, he went on. One of the saboteurs called Korax Urhui. Kor's eyes widened as he swallowed a handful of rot. I assume this Korax killed him for his effrontery? Yes, and I rather wish he hadn't. Well, of course he had to respond, but the other two were killed in the conflict, and I wanted at least one to interrogate. Shaking his head, Kor said, whether or not we are considered warriors, we are still soldiers of the Empire. We are doing our duty. How does that make us traitors? Because, Mara said, the Kuchka on this mine feel oppressed, and we have sided with their oppressors. We haven't sided with anyone, Kor said dolefully, dipping more bread into the grapok sauce. My own first officer, Kolar, has attempted to interrogate the miners, but no one will give him an answer. If they were not loyal subjects of the Empire, I would use the mine sifter on them. Koloth chuckled bitterly through his casserole. Klingon law clearly stated that while the mine sifter could be used freely on any aliens, it could be used on Klingons only if they had been bound by law as criminals. Sarkav would no doubt allow us to question any Kushka that way. But not Chemkuch, Mara said while wiping soup from her lip. Never Chemkuch. After all, Sarkav wanted to have Jerva killed because she had the effrontery to challenge Chemkuch. Never mind that he was her inferior, and that the challenge was legitimate, and that she won it. It's obvious, Koloth said, that Sarkav is an incompetent. Every single incident on this mine can be traced to his failure to do his duty as head of security. While I was speaking with Kobik, he received a report that someone had raided the dispensary and injured the nurse on duty. The question must be asked, why is Sarkav still alive? That is a fine question, my friend, Kang said, and I will ask Kobik tomorrow, myself. Then the door slid open again, revealing dessert, and to Koloth's great relief, all talk of duty ceased. To be continued tomorrow, for part 4. There's a link below in the description of this video that links to the Day of Honor event, which includes several panels, including me talking about Star Trek Adventures alongside Next Generation Illustrated Rick Sternbach, fellow writers Kelli Fitzpatrick and Tyler Attico, and a bunch of folks from Modiphius Games, including Jim Johnson, Sam Webb, Chris Birch, and Nathan Dowdle. Check that out, along with a whole bunch of other panels about Klingon stuff from Star Trek Adventures, Star Trek Online, and a bunch of actors and Klingon linguists from Star Trek Discovery talking about portraying Klingons on screen. Check me out online at DeCandido.net, at DeCandido.wordpress.com, which is my blog, and Patreon.com/KRAD, which is my Patreon, which has all sorts of cool stuff on it. Please stay safe and tune in tomorrow for Part 4. Thanks.